Hello Planeteers, my name is Sambulo Mhlongo and I graduated with an advanced diploma in nature conservation from the Mangosuthu University of Technology, and I'll be taking you through a presentation on biodiversity and food webs. So here is the hierarchy of models, and we've seen the slide on previous talk. It's a series of models that we are using to answer the question, why is Earth habitable? We are now at stage 5 and we've added life into the picture. So the simple forms of life like cyanobacteria are not enough to make the Earth habitable. We need a variety of life forms to make the Earth habitable. So we learned from the previous talk, which was photosynthesis, that cyanobacteria started utilizing water during photosynthesis, releasing oxygen as a byproduct. Over time, oxygen accumulated in the Earth's atmosphere, allowing for the evolution of oxygen metabolizing organisms. So the overview of my talk about biodiversity and food webs, I'm going to start by giving the definition of biodiversity and explaining the different types of biodiversity. Biodiversity is measured, and I will explain the different measures of biodiversity. Then I will explain why is biodiversity important and go through the threats that biodiversity is facing, and then I will go through the different conservation methods that are used to conserve biodiversity. And lastly, I will explain why South Africa is special with regards to biodiversity. Biodiversity. So biodiversity it simply means the variety of life. So we can define biodiversity as the variety of life on Earth and the essential interdependence of all living things. So biodiversity is the expected result of evolution. So evolution is the change in the genetic composition of species over time. So all species share a common ancestor, and we've learned that from a single species which came into existence over 3.6 billion years ago, an estimate of 8.7 billion species have evolved to populate the planet today. Of these 8 million, only about 2 million species, including marine and terrestrial species, have actually been described and classified by scientists. So during the evolution during the evolution process, species were able to adapt to different ecological niches. So an ecological niche describes how an individual organism fits into an ecosystem. So a niche of an organism will include where they get their food, shelter, who they mate with, and it's basically the role that the organism plays in the ecosystem. So each species has unique adaptations so that they don't directly compete with other species for resources. They have their own unique niche. So different species can coexist because they occupy different niches. So many niches will result in many species. So I did explain earlier that biodiversity is the variety of life on Earth and the essential interdependence of all living things. So there are 3 types of biodiversity. So the first one is genetic biodiversity. Genetic diversity is diversity within a species. So every individual is unique because of their distinctive gene. As we can see here, we've got the human species, and we can see that all these individuals in this picture are different, and that is because of their different distinctive genes. And here we've got a dog species, and we can see that we've got different breeds of dogs, and this is a result of their distinctive genes. So the large variation of different gene sets allow an individual or even the whole population to have the capacity to endure stresses in any form, like pollution, even with diseases, like the diseases that a human face. So the ability for you to survive a disease such as COVID-19 has been linked to also your genes. So species diversity is diversity between species in a particular location. So here we can see that we've got different species in a particular region, and here we have different species of the rhino. So species diversity is a measure of an ecosystem species richness and evenness. If an ecosystem has got poor species diversity, it may not function properly or efficiently. So the species richness is the number of species of different species within a defined region, and species evenness is the measure of the relative abundance of different species in a region. Ecosystem diversity is the diversity observed among ecosystems in a particular region. So each ecosystem provides different kinds of habitat and living places, providing a home for different species. Different species have different functional roles that they play in the ecosystem. So this helps maintain the characteristics unique to that ecosystem. So we can see here in the pink, where it's shaded in pink, that is the fynbos. So the fynbos will have uh, distinctive species that will make it different from others. So we'll have species such as the protea, and that will give the fynbos its unique characteristics. And here we've got in red, we've got the savanna. So the savanna as well, it will be a home to different types of species that will make the savanna unique. So here in the savanna, mostly you'll find your tree species such as your acacia species. That makes the savanna biome unique. So biodiversity is measured, and there are three types of measures of biodiversity. So we've got alpha diversity, which is diversity within an ecosystem. We've got beta diversity, which is comparing diversity between ecosystems, and gamma diversity is the overall comparison of biodiversity across ecosystems. So here on this images here, we've got site A, site B, and site C. So these are different ecosystems. So in site A, the alpha diversity will be 7 because there are 7 different species. In site B, the alpha diversity will be 2 because there are 2 different species. And in site C, there will be 7. The alpha diversity will be 7 because there are 7 species. So when we look at gamma diversity, which is the overall comparison across ecosystems, so we'll have the gamma diversity will be 13 because we have 13 species across all these ecosystems. So biodiversity is a measure that combines species richness and evenness across species. Biodiversity is measured because high biodiversity is linked to ecological stability. Species interconnectivity through food chains and food webs forms a key part in understanding why Earth is habitable. So the food web is an important ecological concept. A food web represents the feeding relationship within a community. It represents the transfer of energy in the form of food from the source, which is the plant, but the plants get the energy from the sun, through to herbivores, then carnivores. So basically a food web or connection of food chains. So each link in the food chain is known as a trophic level. So the food chain represents the transfer of energy which comes from the sun. So the more complex the food web, the more resilient it is, and it's quicker to recover from environmental shock. So the ability to recover from environmental shock, that is what we call ecological stability. So ecological stability is the ecosystem's ability to maintain form and function after a disturbance. And there are 2 types of ecological stability. So we've got resilience. Resilience is the ability to recover quickly after an environmental shock. And we have resistance. Resistance is the ability to refuse displacement during an environmental stress. So there is a relationship between food webs and ecological stability. So a complex food web is more likely to be stable than a simpler food web. Higher biodiversity promotes ecosystem stability and resilience. So biodiversity is important, and we get different values from the biodiversity. So biodiversity contributes to life on Earth. So Earth's health ecosystems are vital for human welfare and survival, as they provide us with essential products and benefits are known as ecosystem services. So, like over 90% of our food that we eat and we depend on comes from these ecosystem services. Ecosystem services also provides us with building material, medicine, fresh and clean water, clean air, and also these ecosystem services play a role in mitigating climate change. So biodiversity is very, very important and crucial for survival of man on Earth, because without these ecosystem services, we won't be able to survive on planet Earth. So, the Earth is losing species at an alarming rate. So it's estimated that 3 species per hour are going extinct, and about 20,000 extinctions occur here. And when a species or of plant or animal goes extinct, many other species are affected. So we really should be concerned about biodiversity, because as I mentioned from the previous slides, that we owe our well-being to biodiversity. Without biodiversity, we wouldn't be able to survive on Earth. So we really should be concerned about biodiversity. And the thing is that biodiversity is facing a lot of threats, and these threats are caused by us, the man who needs biodiversity to survive on Earth. So some of the threats that biodiversity faces are the ones that are listed. I'll just go through a few. So it's poaching and illegal hunting, it's climate change, habitat destruction, and pollution. So poaching and illegal hunting. Poaching is the illegal hunting of endangered or protected animals. So poaching and illegal hunting are not exactly the same. So hunting is hunting of animals that can be hunted during hunting season, or animals that the legislation allows you to hunt, but you hunt out of the conditions of either your hunting license or your permit. So like hunting out of the hunting season and not following the correct legislation, that will be considered illegal hunting. So in South Africa, each of the 9 provinces regulates hunting of game, birds, and fur game. So each province complies its own sets of regulations. So the regulations that are in Western Cape may not be the same as what happens in KZN. So you might find that you want to hunt in KZN and then you follow the rules or regulations from Western Cape. Then that might also be considered as illegal hunting. So climate change alters timing in reproduction. So animals reproduce seasonally and time their mating so that their young are born when the foraging conditions are optimal. So climate change alters this, and this has a negative consequence for the animals. It also alters migration of animal species, and animal migrations are important for healthy function of many ecosystems. So when abiotic and biotic cues are altered by climate change, migration may be altered. And as I mentioned, that animal migrations are important for healthy functions of many ecosystems. So that means that these ecosystems will be affected negatively. So, and also climate change causes droughts. So we've seen droughts in the Western Cape and also the Eastern Cape. So habitat destruction, which is the habitat loss from wildfire. So habitat destruction renders an entire habitat functionally unable to support species present. So biodiversity is reduced as a result of habitat loss. So when existing organisms in the habitat are displaced or destroyed, so then the biodiversity is lost. So there are ways to which are adopted to conserve biodiversity. So, what is conservation? Conservation is focused on protecting species from extinction, maintaining and restoring habitat, enhancing ecosystem services, and protecting biological diversity. So, there are two types of conservation strategies that we are using. So, the first one is in situ, which is within the species' natural habitat. So, this will be in areas like protected areas such as national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, and biospheres. And then the other conservation strategy is ex situ, which will be outside the natural habitat of the species. So this will include zoological parks, botanical gardens, sperm banks, and gene banks. So an example of an ex situ conservation will be the Johannesburg Zoo. So the zoo houses about 27 endangered species, and that includes the rhino. And they have conservation within the zoo, so they'll have educational programs to teach about conservation and importance of conservation. And they have a breathing and release program. So it's the Johannesburg Zoo is one of the few places in the world with white lions. So white lions is a result of a genetic mutation of the African lion, and the Johannesburg Zoo has been considerably successful with their breeding program of the white lion. And by the way, you see these images. This is not the real Johannesburg Zoo, so it's just an image of just any zoo. So an example of in situ conservation will be the Kruger National Park. So the species are kept within the park, which is their natural habitat. Maybe some species could have been introduced, but most it's their natural habitat. So most parks face poaching, where they're hunting rhino and elephants. So there are anti-poaching measures that are adopted. So these include Sandpark Game Rangers, the South African Police Service, and the South African National Defence Force working together to combat poaching. And also, they also includes the use of technology like drones to combat poaching. So we've learned about biodiversity, and now we want to find out why is South Africa important with regards to biodiversity. So South Africa is the third most diverse country in the world, and this is according to the South African National Biodiversity Institute, and it's the sixth most mega diverse country in the world. So mega diverse means an area or country exhibiting great biodiversity, and this includes a large number of endemic species, and we know that South Africa is rich in endemic species. So the fynbos biome has the highest beta diversity of ecosystems. So in closing, biodiversity helps sustain life on Earth. So biodiversity plays a crucial role in making the Earth habitable. So biodiversity boosts ecosystem productivity, where each species, no matter how small, all have an important role to play. Earth's diverse and thriving ecosystems are vulnerable to collapse. So if we do not change our ways, the ecosystems will collapse, and the ecosystem services that we depend on will also be lost, and then life on Earth will never be the same. Thank you for watching this presentation.